Okay, so this is an intervention really that I've developed over a few years. It began when I was teaching. A student brought in a handout that she had gotten at a workshop, and I kind of used the handout to accommodate to the class, and I began. I'm a social constructionist, so I began teaching by sitting in silence and having the students really take responsibility, take ownership for the class. And while it made them very nervous, it propelled the learning because they did the readings and it was very powerful. So then I began using it in my practice. And in my private practice, I see individuals, couples, and families. And so what I began doing is just suggesting that we try this. This kind of, I often will try new things with people. And I just said, would you be willing to try this? And I would run them through basic meditation guidelines, kind of breath work, and focusing on a meaningful mantra. And so we would kind of walk up the stairs to my office and sit for the first 5 minutes, in 5 or 10 minutes really, in total silence, meditating together, face to face. And what began to happen was people would, I always call it doorknob conversations. They would begin the session with their doorknob conversations. So it had the effect of, I think, organizing them and almost like bringing them right in very quickly. And so the way it fits with systemic practice, I see families and couples as systems, and I see individuals as systems, and in the intervention together, we're kind of looking to the energies of the system, trying to soften the energies of the system so that they move perhaps to a different form. And so with systems, I'm always trying to perturb the system and kind of put it off balance, and trusting that it will find its own new balance, new place of homeostasis. And so meditation just speeds that up. So I think meditation is developing as an evidence-based practice. There's a lot of research happening where they're finding that meditation completely changes your neurology. And they're looking at depression and anxiety and all kinds of mental illnesses. And, you know, certainly it's been accepted that meditation changes your physical self for years and years and years, people who've had heart problems and whatever. I tend to be someone who thinks of my practice as not a science, but an art. And I always have a problem with, I shouldn't say this, but I talk about practice-based evidence rather than evidence-based practice.
Are there any couples where you think, I just wouldn't go 100 miles near mindfulness with this couple, and maybe with one of them, a kind of a sanctuary from the other person? Is there any contraindications of?
Well, I think certainly there are couples who come with violence happening or major mental illness where this practice would be contraindicated, as it might elevate certain symptoms. Like I work with people who have had trauma and they tend to dissociate a lot. And even though they begin with a lot of hesitation about sitting with me, closing their eyes, and are very frightened of the energy that begins to happen, I guess what I think about is when I'm working with couples and families, I say, you're here to learn something new, different ways of being. And you can do that at home. Actually, when I was first starting out as a family therapist, I worked with a family that was totally psychotic. The daughter was schizophrenic, and they came one night to the clinic where I was working, and there were 8 of them. And I walked in, little family therapist, all pumped up, and they wouldn't pay any attention to me. So I stood on the table in the middle of the room and tried to get their attention, and they were not paying attention. And so I kept doing all of these things. I went and got a newspaper, started reading. Anyway, I finally had to kick them out at the end of the night. And so I think there are families that are not interested in change, and there are families where you have to work very hard at kind of getting their attention. And, you know, there are pros and cons to this process, the meditative dialogue process, and how it might work with them. They might be interested, intrigued, or they might just say, this is a bunch of hogwash and we'll try something else.
Some of the criticism of mindfulness is it's somebody at the Maudsley Hospital has just written about the idea that it can depersonalize people, can take away some of their existing personality, and somehow has an effect of dampening down the personality. Would you say that was, you know, one of the risk factors in using mindfulness?
That's funny, because my response to that is, wow, that's giving a lot of power to mindfulness. I do think that it certainly alters people's ways of being. And I guess one of the things that I think about, I certainly, the dissociative aspect is one, which is kind of depersonalization, but I don't think it is that powerful to change people's personalities. It might give them more skills to dealing with things, so perhaps they're not as chaotic in their lives, and that might be a good thing. So I don't know. I've actually not read that. So this paper that's in the Journal of Family Therapy coming up is one that I wrote in kind of a whimsical way, trying to apply this meditative dialogue process and with music as a metaphor, as one of the ways to think about getting in there. And families really respond to that. They do become playful. And I think it makes things more spontaneous. Yeah.
So you're not suggesting that other family therapists or systemic therapists reading the article should just think the metaphor of music is the one to hold to. It could be another art form or another idea.
Yes, whatever is their way of being, I think. I think that certainly there are people who will respond to this, and there are people who will think it's kind of crazy, kind of fluffy.
Would it need to have some level of training before you introduce people to mindfulness?
Mm-hmm. So I do think with someone who has a kind of a predisposition to psychotic illness, they would need to be in a very good place to be able to sustain the practice. I just don't think they would be able to do it.
But in terms of if somebody watched this film and then just decided, right, I've got a general idea about what mindfulness practice is, I will now introduce it into my practice, would you say, no, don't do that, go and do a mindfulness training first?
I think that it would be good to do a mindfulness training, yes.
And that's 10 sessions or 10 afternoons or something, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes. But I also believe that people who are meditators and do the training more informally, they don't have to necessarily practice in the MBSR way. So you can teach meditation. So I'm saying two things.
Go on. Spell those two things out again. So the two things about who could teach this or who could pass this on in systemic practice?
Well, what my experience has been, I'm not somebody who can kind of draw the guidelines, but my experience has been that the people who do try it are people who are meditators to begin with. And so they really do know what they're doing with the meditation. If you don't know, I do think you need to get some training and become experienced in the meditation. I think it really depends on who you are. It's a very individual thing. It's what you're comfortable with. I think it's like any technique that, a lot of us go to workshops and we find something fascinating and we say, oh, I'm going to try that. And it's exciting and moves along for a little while. And then you go, now what am I going to do?
So thinking internationally about systemic family therapy training, would you like to see 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation before each day starts for each of those students?
Yes.
That was an unambiguous response.
Yes, that's how we're going to change the world.
And are you planning to come to the UK?
Yes, I am going to be speaking in September at the AFT conference at Kent, and getting excited actually about meeting all the people over there that I've been talking with for years and have never met, like you. The use of mindfulness and spirituality practices to help couples develop compassion and empathy for themselves and for each other.
Wonderful.
Yeah.